on to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen.
With me today are Joel Elston and Sam Page.
This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today.
Now, the topic of the show today is self-sabotage versus self-mastery. And so the question of the day is going to be, can I get through the introduction without self-sabotaging? If I can, that means I'm going to have a good conversation. If I can't, that means I'm going to have a better conversation with my friends Joel and Sam. So how have I done so far? Well, right now it's looking like a good conversation. I'm still aiming for great.
Well, it's all perspective. It is perspective based.
It is.
Good. Yes.
Oh, God. I was sitting here actually as the music was playing, thinking to myself, okay, so how do I want to introduce this? And nothing came to me. So I just started babbling at the mouth. I figured that was a good way to start because, you know, that's how self-sabotage usually is. It's some sort of a babbling that goes on, usually in a conversation with yourself. So I figured I'd set the stage that way. That kind of works. But once again, Joel, this is a book that you have delved into and are sharing with us as a basis for a topic of conversation here on the show. So why don't you give us the 2-minute scoop on it? What's going on in this book?
Well, I found this book by mistake, and the title, it just got to me, and I said I need to look at that. So I listened to the sample. Then of course I get the book and I listen to it. And what I love about this book in particular, if you were to take probably our last, several podcasts and combine it into one book, this would be that book. It's amazing.
Really?
It sort of covers everything.
Oh,
I love it. It's other than our psilocybin time. This is she didn't hit on that, but the other stuff was just amazing, and it went into the detail of sort of like the obstacle is the point. Your life. We are challenged, and unchallenged people don't develop. And what just that living that way of how to live optimally, or be able to no matter what, the self-sabotage and what it protects. She does a deep dive in self-sabotage, and that's always based on something historical. Your self-sabotage is out of fear of doing that again. So I'm going to keep, or sometimes the fear of success, the fear of responsibility that comes, the change that comes with success. One of the things that I resonated a lot with is a lot of the pro athletes I work with have come from very humble beginnings, and all of a sudden they're worth millions of dollars.
Oh yeah.
And the self-sabotage that takes place when they have that money and the amount of money they can blow is just amazing. It's just because they've been poor their whole life. They really had nothing. And all of a sudden somebody said, here's a check for $10 million and you're making $5 million a year forever in their mind forever. And it's just the sabotage that takes place, and the repetitive behavior, the bringing the old people from the old neighborhood along with them. It's just, it's almost stereotypical in the sense that these athletes do this. So this book talks about how and why. It talks about the reprogramming process. It gets into a lot of the subconscious mind, like we talk about a lot. What I was really fascinated, what I want to talk about in general, is just of all the books we read, this is put it all together in a really nice way. I don't know who this author is. She's fantastic. But it's just, I really love how it all came together. And it's not really a law of attraction book, but it is a law of attraction book.
Well, it doesn't need, I mean, since everything in life is law of attraction one way or another, in that sense, it's related. And that's all we ever really need here on the show. The thing that I'm kind of interested in here is this whole idea. Well, I mean, you brought it up in terms of a model of what happens with many athletes who come from a poor background and suddenly are millionaires, which is an obvious example. And it's one that really shows the extremes of the situation. But I think it's also fair to say, and I'm sure you would agree with this is something that people regularly do, just not on the kind of scale that the athlete is doing it on.
Sure.
They're just doing it on a smaller scale, right? And it's something that probably all of us have engaged in at one time or another. Many of us, many times. I mean, does anybody get out of this unscathed? I'm not sure anybody really does.
I'm sure we all have the self-sabotaging behavior at some point. I'm the poster child for self-sabotage. I mean, I took it to levels that became felonious. I mean, this is so Yeah, I can write the book on that, but
Yeah.
I
Well,
do
don't
see
bother.
though.
You have other books in the work. You don't want to work on that one just
Yeah,
yet.
Lord
I'm
knows
just
I don't
saying.
need another book right now. So,
Yeah.
but it is. I mean, it takes place when, one of my young clients, she's a nursing student. She's very bright, and she has a very limited budget, and she's finishing nursing school. And every day she goes to Starbucks and spends $7 for a coffee.
Mm.
And I'm just fascinated with that mindset. And it's like, well,
How
I
does she
need to
do it?
reward. Yeah, she said, well, it's my only pleasure. I
Oh.
said, well, I appreciate that, but can't you make that drink at home for $1 and instead of $7, and make your own coffee and put all the other stuff in it, or just eat a bowl of fat and sugar? It's the same thing. And yeah, she didn't like that one, but
Yeah, I can see that one.
yeah,
Yeah.
but she has programmed into her mind that she could do that. And what we started point, she has a credit card debt of about $4,000. It's just
Hmm.
she pays the minimum payment on,
Hmm.
which it'll never get paid.
Mm.
So I said, if you just go to Starbucks every other day, this is how much money you'll have extra. Apply that to your credit card, and then you'll start knocking down that pretty much. And we
Mm.
did started doing that process.
Oh, okay.
That became rewarding, and she then went and got her a cheap espresso machine, which is a reasonable buy, and use it. And so she's created her own version of the drink, and
Wow.
we figured it out, not counting the machine, which is about $49, but it cost her about 88 cents to make the coffee every morning. So
Mm.
she's about probably a month away from getting her credit card paid off, but
Good for
changing
her.
that self-sabotaging behavior. But
Yeah.
it's a really hard thing to do, because some of that one's a pretty obvious one, but some of the other stuff is really deep.
Yeah. Well, a lot of it, basically goes back to childhood years. I mean, it's the formative
Absolutely.
years are where a lot of this stuff kind of starts brewing. To borrow a phrase from the coffee world, it starts brewing
Sure.
and turning into something, and that something
Yes.
is usually rather unpleasant. The thing that's always fascinated me about that is how powerful it is, because it's almost like it. I mean, if we were to turn it into like a metaphor, we would say it's like a monster that grabs a hold of you and won't let go. It's
Right.
that kind of a thing. So
The
when we're talking about that level of self-sabotage, turning that into self-mastery, that's a thing.
It really is. And there was years ago, I worked with this lady who had her children removed for addiction reasons by foster care, and she was devastated by that. And so she took her. They when you have your children taken, you're given a treatment plan to complete before they can come home.
Mhm.
Shockingly, a number of people don't even try, but this lady was very dedicated, and she spent every waking moment, and in almost record time, she created her treatment plan. I mean, she
Wow.
completed it, and I was very impressed. And I was working with her in trying to, get the mindset right. So she had a home visit where they were going to come inspect the home, and they were going to do a final drug test. And if that was clean, she was going to get her kids back that afternoon.
Oh, man. I could just see it
And
coming.
yeah, and the night before she smoked pot, and
Wow.
she tested positive. And pot wasn't even her main addiction then. And she said she lied. She said I didn't smoke pot. And finally, when
Mhm.
her and I were meeting, unfortunately the kids weren't told any of this. They didn't know all that was going on.
Right.
And she said, I'm so scared to get him back. I want him back so bad, but I screwed it up so bad the first time. And so she self-sabotaged it. It was really obvious, but when she broke it down, the good news is she had another 90 days. She completed her program again and has remained clean. And the kids have remained in the home for a while now. And
Good.
it's good. But we sabotage sometimes, even the stuff we want, we really don't want.
Yeah.
It
Why
requires
is
other
that?
things.
I
Yeah,
mean I mean,
really.
it's easy to ask that question when you're sitting on the outside, but when you're in the middle of it, it doesn't seem all that difficult to kind of blur the boundary there. And
Yes,
yet, as
yes.
we said outside, we say, how do we blur that boundary? How do we pull that off?
A lot of it is just a subconscious brain in play, and an unwillingness to want to change, and the
Mm.
unwillingness to, because even though if it would be, I've shared with you before that years ago when I would work with social services in settings where we had to investigate a child abuse case. and you would go into these horrific, home settings, and horrific things have happened to these kids, and you're thinking, okay, we're here to rescue these kids, and the perpetrator of these vile acts was in the room, and would take him outside, and they would come kicking and screaming. They didn't want to leave. They were living in pure hell, but it was a known hell,
right?
And they just didn't want to leave. And then later, a week later, when they're in foster care, they're thriving, they're doing great, they're eating full 3 or 4 meals a day, they're feeling good. But that thought of change, it was so scary that I just want to stay the same because it's what I know. That's a lot of self-sabotage.
And I know that in my own experience, admittedly limited compared to what many of the people that you've been describing have gone through, but just kind of dredging up my own stuff. When I find something that I know really goes back to my youngest years, and it's been playing around in the background for the longest time, and plays under certain circumstances that crop up, and once they crop up, it just kind of kicks right into gear. I know that one of the things that I experience, and I imagine it's probably true for others, is that at the moment that the trigger happens, whatever the trigger is, and the tape starts to play, the program starts to play itself out, it's like my brain freezes. It's like it just kind of stops, and I can't do it. It's even possible for me to know I need to do X in order to get out of this or to get to a better place. And because the programming is against me doing X, I can't even do X. But I can't think it out. I can't plan. All I can do is just kind of wait for the brain to unfreeze, which can take anywhere from a few seconds to a few minutes to a few hours to even a few days, depending on what it is. And I've often wondered, why is the brain freezing like that?
Again, the fight or flight mechanism is engaged, and that's when it freezes. It's perceiving a threat for some reason and freezes. It only has 2 options at that point. It's to flee or fight, and you're doing neither. So you're just sitting there like, there's nothing to fight and there's nothing to really flee, but it feels like there's something that should be fleeing from.
Yeah. That's just pretty much going on.
Yeah. And I know with me, because with the childhood I had and my struggle with the gambling addiction, for years I struggled financially. I mean, it took me a long time to not struggle financially. And this will happen to me occasionally. I don't struggle financially at all anymore. I'm in a wonderful place, and I'm blessed to be able to say that. But the something will come up, like an unexpected tax bill.
Right.
It might be a couple $1,000s or whatever. It's no big deal. You write a check, pay the tax bill, don't care. But yet a side of me gets triggered, like, oh my gosh, it's like, and I'm like, then I logically am laughing because I just don't care. But yet a side of me is triggered to my childhood or my gambling addiction. It's like, I've literally slept outside because I didn't have any money. I've eaten out of a trash can. So, I get sort of transported that. I mean, I have to go to sometimes like to pull up my accounts and just say, okay. It's a weird way to do it, but it's, I get triggered sometimes financially with that. And it's not logical. It's just reverting back to that time when everything was so scary financially.
Yeah. So I think we have really reached the title of the book. And I just realized we didn't name the title of the book. People who are seeing the title on their podcast episode or on the webpage or whatever, they know what the title is, but I should probably say what it is, because it's The Mountain Is You, subtitled Transforming Self-Sabotage into Self-Mastery by Brianna Wiest. And the mountain really is you. That's what we're talking about here. And it really is a mountain, especially if it's something that's chronically embedded in you.
Yes. And we've talked on that subject in a roundabout way the last few weeks, and this sort of brings it to that idea of the struggles that we go through. The struggles are there. The body and mind is intended to struggle. It's intended to advance. It's meant to overcome, and the right attitude toward this. That's where when you master this, when you change your perspective and you grow through it instead of having to go through it. It's just you're growing through the process of whatever your struggle is, and you sort of view it as a strengthening event. And eventually you see things differently, like stuff that would just like, oh my gosh, right now it's just, look, I have survived the worst possible things that can happen to a human being. And I survived that. So, the $2,000 tax bill is not moving that's not moving the needle this week, you know.
Yeah.
But yet it's shocking how your brain is always on the lookout using historical data to measure and fill in the blanks how dangerous anything is.
And it's shocking to realize just how it's generally described as one of the more primitive parts of the brain, and
Yes.
how that primitive part plays such a major role in our conscious activities. I mean, that's a shock, really.
It is. It is. It's just it's that illogical. What's bad? You know it's illogical. You know while it's happening. It's just or you may not. Some people don't. But even when I know it's illogical, it still doesn't. You have to work through it.
Yeah. So let's talk about what Brianna says. Brianna Wiest, the author of the book that we're basing our conversation on here. What does she talk about in terms of how you turn self-sabotage into self-mastery?
It's usually a perspective based, you know, that she talks about all the breathing techniques, all the meditations that we talked about on the show before, EFT, a lot of the emotional freedom techniques for those who don't know what that means, but NLP, neuro linguistic programming, these are all tools that you attack or you approach the subconscious brain with, and that eventually changes it. So it's sort of a comprehensive list. It's nothing that we haven't covered. But as I said, it's all in one book, and it's sort of a nice way. If I'm going to recommend a book to sort of get a lot of what we believe, this is a great book for that.
It's almost like it's a toolkit, a tool chest, right? Because we talk about tools all the time. This is a collection of all the tools.
Yes, it collects all the tools, and she covers so much of the individual topics of your perspective, your attitude, what is in your control, how you view something, reframing. It was one of the great techniques of everything is where you reframe situations. Part of the neuro-linguistic programming is almost always reframing something. And eventually your subconscious brain eventually catches on like, okay, this is the new programming for that.
I love that last phrase. Eventually your subconscious brain catches on. That's where it's the magic that happens, but it's also the mysterious thing. Like what changed? All of a sudden, I'm not focusing that way anymore. And that's the feeling of it. Like, I mean, well, part of the feeling is, oh my God, I'm free of this thing. But the other part of the feeling is, I don't really, I mean, yeah, it changed, but I didn't feel any different. It's the same feeling that I had before.
Right. And it's the subconscious brain has no emotion. It is a very fast computer, but it doesn't have any emotion. It's emotionally clueless. Whatever you store a memory as, whether it's a good memory, it just accepts that's a good memory. If it's a bad memory, it stores it as a bad memory. So anything that reminds you of those old memories are going to sort of elicit the emotion that you stored the original memory with. So to reprogram that, it's a very slow process. The subconscious brain, which since we don't have direct access to it, it can only base on how you're feeling. So you're reprogramming with new information, and it eventually goes, okay, well, wait a minute. That I multiple times have told my roller coaster story. I reprogrammed my brain to love roller coasters, but it is like, I went from roller coasters will kill me, obviously, to I love roller coasters. I did that pretty quick that time because it's just like it was so absurd that I thought the other way, but my brain accepted that.
It's funny. It's funny you mentioned the roller coasters too, because I know you've brought that up before, but I was literally earlier on this afternoon as I was working on something else. I don't even know why it came up, but I was recalling a photo I had seen posted on social media some years back. I don't even remember how far back it was, but it was a photo of 4 Tibetan Buddhist monks in their red and gold robes, their distinctive robes. And they're in a roller coaster car with their arms in the air, screaming, obviously having fun taking a roller coaster ride, which is about the last thing you think about where a Tibetan monk is concerned.
Yes.
But it kind of illustrates, there's an example of somebody who, or 4 people actually, who were not only going outside of their comfort zone in order to have some fun, but they had done a reprogramming job in the process, because these, usually taciturn, very serious meditative monks are screaming their lungs out with joy on this crazy joyride that they're taking,
which is amazing. It shows that that's the exact point you made. It shows it's possible. Years of training almost trained against that, but yet they somehow found the ability to still connect with that.
Yeah. Is,
I love that.
is this resonating, Sam? I mean, are you like saying that some of this is on with me?
Oh, absolutely. Well, like that last example with the monks, I actually did a quick Google image search, and that's wonderful. I love that for them. But yeah, it's a great example of what we were talking about last week about, leaving your comfort zone and having this literal joyride of an experience and how expansive that's going to be for them. And that'll give them plenty to process as they like continue with their meditation practice. But yeah, generally just self-sabotage is like this conversation is bringing to light just how prevalent that is in our society. It's not necessarily something a lot of people talk about, but so many people do it, whether or not they realize it. And I was actually just thinking about that earlier this evening about how I spent a lot of my life doing that and how just maybe within the last 2 or 3 years kind of got to a point where I'm doing that not much at all, and actually like trying to work with myself and instead of against myself as I did through like my 20s and early 30s.
Sure. But I love your observation that we're all doing it, but we don't talk about it.
Yeah.
I mean, this isn't exactly good party conversation.
That's probably
well, if you're at my party, it is.
Well, maybe your Joel Elson party. Yeah, this is true.
Yeah. So that's a great point, Sam. Anytime we're dealing with this, and I'll pull out one of my great examples that everybody loves when I talk about this. Using the baseline of the most tasty product in the world, Nutella. Remember, the self-sabotage for me with Nutella is when Nutella is in my house, I will eat Nutella.
Yeah, the whole thing.
There's no willpower. It's just it's in the bottle, the jar. I'm eating it till I'm scraping the jar. It's just that's it. Now,
I respect that.
Thank you. The act of bringing Nutella into the house is the self-sabotaging part. You know what I'm saying? So if I'm going to try to say, look, I'm going to buy it and I'm just going to use it, occasionally as a gift or as a treat, that's self-sabotage because I know that's not accurate. It's going to be eaten within 6 minutes of me walking in the door. So it's what I do. So I've learned to, and I say this all jokingly, but I don't keep junk or chocolate in the house because I do eat it. I really do. But I have all the willpower in the world and self-control by not bringing. I don't buy it at the store, but when it crosses my doorway, it's there. So self-sabotage in that case is buying it and bringing it into the house. That's what the sabotage is.
And when you do that with a degree of consciousness,
yes,
it doesn't mean that you're not going to do it. I mean, I've done that. For you, it's Nutella. For me, it's chocolate ice cream. I don't really care what the substance is, but I can do the same thing. Well, I don't actually eat the whole half gallon. I'll take 2 or 3 days for that. I won't do it in 6 minutes. But besides
we'll work on that. We'll work on that.
Yeah, I'm sure we will.
I need to come up there and train you if you.
Okay.
We can knock that out in an hour.
I never knew you could hire a life coach for that. Okay, that's good to know.
I'll help anybody achieve any goals. So.
Oh my goodness, you just knocked me off my thought. But
sorry.
No, I'm sure you aren't. But but the thing is when we're making that purchase, because like you said, that's the key point. You can make the decision not to make the purchase, but it is possible to be making the purchase knowing it's leading to a result that we don't want, and we make it anyway.
Sure.
We make the decision anyway. Why is that?
And that is, if we figure out that exact answer every time, there's a reason, and it might be different every time, but knowing that's coming home. I don't want to do that. I've been doing really good on my diet, but I want to buy ice cream, but I'm not going to eat it. You may negotiate with yourself. I've done that before. Like, back in the day when I was in the middle of my gambling addiction, I used to say, well, I'm just going to go to the dog track and bet one race.
Right.
Now, there was never a moment in my betting career that I bet one race. I bet all the races. So, anything you could bet, I bet. But yet, to get me there, to satisfy my addiction, I would lie to myself. And then, I used to hide $100 bill in the back of my wallet. Like, I'm not going to touch that.
Not going to touch that.
Yeah, that never slowed down. I used to have money in my car. So I'm not going to come all the way back out of my car. No. One time I left $500 at home and I drove all the way home an hour.
Oh my God. Wow.
And then back, So I had, once that got triggered, I'm lying to myself. And the truth is, I wanted the dopamine release from, the gambling, wanting more from gambling, and that was worth whatever I did. And but I knew it, and that was part of my self-sabotage by believing that I had some level of control.
You just uttered, I think, a major word for us: dopamine.
Yes.
Or dopamine release is actually the phrase, right?
Yes. Yes.
And it occurs to me, part of the process, you tell me if this is right or wrong, but it's just, this like seems it would be true. Part of the process for changing a behavior is to give yourself something else that gives you a better release.
Yes. The idea, and we use the word dopamine here, there's multiple chemicals involved.
Right,
it's the one that's most prevalent. But one of the tasks that I help people do is getting through stuff you don't want to do by putting something on the other side of what you don't want to do that you really want to do. And then making it where you have to complete that. You eventually train the mind to almost get a release of chemicals by doing the task, because it's leading to that thing you really want to do. So I've seen that work for me. The idea that I need to, when I first got into my life coaching business, my record keeping on my books was just, whatever, I'll figure it out. Then as I became more and more successful, more streams of revenue coming in, it's like, okay, the week before the taxes were due, I'm running like a crazy man, gathering all these documents, getting all this stuff, and almost having a nervous breakdown to get it done in time. And so I had to set up a system that where weekly I do reports, I store them, I get my receipts in place. I've done that. And when it comes tax time, I just hand it to the accountant and it's all done now. Easy peasy. Instead of running around crazy trying to find, that if I want to deduct that class that I took for whatever, $500, and I don't know where to find that receipt, and I go online to find it, and you're doing all this stuff crazy, and it's like, wait a minute, I don't want to do that. So I get a reward system of stuff I hate. I hate all this detailed stuff, but the reward of not having to go through that stressful moment in April is fantastic.
So the reward is really the most important thing here. I mean, we're trying to change the behavior pattern, right?
Sure.
But ultimately, that reward, whatever it has to be something that feels real to us, that it feels like a strong potential, that it's going to have a large dose to it, so to speak, a large emotional response that comes out of it. And it has to be something we believe is not just possible, but certain.
Well, yes. And one of the things I use with a lot of I would say 95% of my young male clients have ADHD. And maybe 100%, but I'm gonna leave a little room there. But
a little wiggle room.
So they can hyper focus on a video game for 5 straight hours and never blink. I mean, they're just amazing. But ask them to do a report on some boring book they read or didn't read. Which they're not going to read it. So getting them to do that is impossible because they don't care. But being able to attach the video game play on the other side of completing whatever homework you have then becomes a mechanism that they get the homework done. And then once this works a few times, then the automatic release starts to happen at the homework. And they start, I'm not saying they enjoy it, but it becomes reasonably pleasurable because I know what's on the other side of it.
Yeah.
Love that.
Now, there are also things that everyday people do that we all do to try to reward ourselves. I mean, the idea of rewarding yourself for doing something you don't really want to do is certainly not unique to our conversations here. A lot of people do that fairly regularly. One of the things, though, that I think I've noticed, and I'm curious to see if you've noticed it, is that very often when we set ourselves up for rewards like that, we don't really allow ourselves to enjoy the reward. And then that kind of leads to, well, the retraining isn't working very well.
I sort of get your question. I use video games. That's the most common thing with my clientele.
Sure.
These guys are basically addicted to video games, so the reward is outstanding to them. It's like, I hate English, but I love video games more than I hate English. And and I'm like, look, get a synopsis of the book, get a Cliff Notes version of the book, listen to the book at 5 times the speed or whatever you need to do. get some of the knowledge in the book, write your report, and then go play a video game. So it's really effective for them. But people that get less of, the perception of the reward probably has a lot to do with it as well.
See, I'm thinking about somebody like somebody's working at the office, right? Not somebody who's got ADHD, but just a regular Joe or a regular Mary, all right? And they're working at the office, and they've got to get a report done. We'll use your example of a report. Well, they have to write a report for the boss on something, and they don't really want to do it. But they say, okay, well, once I write the report, I'll reward myself by getting something out of the vending machine. I'll get a cup of coffee or something like that. And so they do the report. They go get whatever the thing is they set up for themselves, and they just kind of drink the coffee, eat the vending machine food, whatever it is, just kind of mindlessly. In other words, they're already on what's the next task, the next thing, and they don't really give themselves the opportunity to enjoy the thing that they were setting themselves up to enjoy.
Exactly, and part of that is getting them. For this to work, you have to relay that information. We need to savor the coffee or the vending machine candy, or whatever. You need to hype the reward to make this work. That's why secondary rewards don't work well. And without getting into too much explanation, dopamine is really rewarded by wanting more. Dopamine is a very complex chemical that it's not the release of dopamine that's pleasurable. It's the act of doing it. Dopamine's released when you begin the process. It's like, I've given into this. That's when so dopamine is what encourages you to keep doing over and over and over again. It's more and more and more. So dopamine is the chemical of more than the chemical of reward. So there's a whole bunch of stuff. It's really hard to explain, but the dopamine process is, we've always used it as the reward was the dopamine. Dopamine is what drives the desire for more, which releases the other good chemicals, but it's more of a driving force, because dopamine always is more. It's like, so no matter what you get done, that was fantastic, thank you. Now we need that next level. Now we need to go further. Now we need dopamine drives addiction. So one drink for an alcoholic is, that was great, thank you. Now I need another. Now I need another. And dopamine is that driving factor. So it is a conduit to more.
I know you said it's complex, and I think you said that kind of as a way to say that this could get really, really deep into a rabbit hole. But you know me, I love rabbit holes. So I'm going to ask anyway, because that's part of what I do here, right? I just dive down rabbit holes. But to me, the fascinating question that comes out of that is, well, I'm not sure if it's a question. It's more of an observation, I guess. But it's that, we're chasing more, which is a new concept for me. I'm like, okay, it's not that we're not looking for the reward, we're looking for the more. That's more is another way of saying addiction, isn't it?
That's my version of it. Yes, that's so much addiction is dopamine based by that driving for more. And the certain brain types who have lower levels of dopamine naturally tend to crave more and more of it by getting more and more. So dopamine is released by getting more, and that craving creates more dopamine for more. And so it's just this vicious cycle until everything's shot in your brain shot, and there's no more dopamine to be released.
See, now that's disturbing, because I'd always heard dopamine was a good thing. That's the feel good. Well, it's one of the feel goods anyway. There's like three of them, I think.
Yeah,
and now the feel good apparently isn't good enough.
But used correctly, it wants to encourage more appropriately. What we do in our society is, like video games, for example, for kids, releases a lot of dopamine, and they're programmed to release dopamine. Their excitement, the level gets harder, you go hard. It's harder to turn off. When you're watching a Netflix series, I forget which one I was watching a while back, and it's one of those 10-show episodes, and I'll be like, okay, I'm going to watch one more, and then I'll go to bed. Well, the ending of that next one is like, cliffhanger. I'm just going to go watch the beginning of the other so I know what happens, and then I can't stop. And they rely on that theory of watch more episodes.
Oh, sure, because it works. It really works. But it like I said, it's also disturbing to me, because we're pursuing something where we can literally set ourselves up to be hung out to dry by the thing we're pursuing.
That's where. That's why all of the stuff we have going on, one of the best algorithms I've ever witnessed, and not a fan of this app at all, but TikTok is the ultimate in this. They haven't
Oh, it
figured
really
out
is.
the ultimate science. And, that is, TikTok, Instagram was, for the 20, 30-year-olds are Instagram people now, but the under 18 crowd is TikTok. That's it. TikTok.
Yeah.
And they scroll for hours. They pick up exactly what you're looking for with in a few swipes, and they give you more and more and more and more, unlimited. And it's amazing. It's brilliant. Again, not good for us at all. It distracts everything. I have a young man go away to a mental health retreat at a program in Tennessee called Onsite. It's a really good program, but they take his phone away for a week, and he's willing to go. He understands the value of it, but he's freaking out of not having his phone for a week. Just he doesn't know. He said, "I don't know what to do without my phone for a week."
It's withdrawal.
It is because
Yeah.
the dopamine craving of more of that phone is not. He's not going to get that now. So he's going to feel wonderful on the other side of this. He's going to have a tolerance break. When I have people that do this, go away for a while, they come back. A lot of people start deleting a lot of the apps and say, I need to not get back there. But the anticipation of not having it is his only stressor about going. He's not afraid of the program. He's afraid of not having his phone.
Wow. Yeah. So getting back to the book that became the topic for today's conversation, the subtitle is Transforming Self-Sabotage into Self-Mastery. Now, this self-sabotage piece that we're talking about right now is tied directly into the pleasure piece. It's tied into the reward piece. And we're finding in this conversation that there's actually a form of self-sabotage going on there. So now that we've really, we framed it as, oh my God, now what do I do? How do we get to self-mastery from there?
Well, it's not an easy leap, obviously, but the self-mastery is often the perspective of how do I challenge myself to get the stuff accomplished the way I want to get it accomplished? What do I want to achieve? Want to go after it. So I have to take into account what is blocking me from doing that. Well, if the dopamine release of me playing with TikTok all day is not allowing me to be more efficient, doing away with figure out a way to cut that back. Incrementally. And she talks a lot of Atomic Habits is a book that I love, talking about incremental change.
Right, we
she
talked about
calls
that.
We did talk about that. She told me in her book, she didn't tell me directly, she said micro changes is what she used, the word she used. Mm-hmm. She advocates micro changes to how to get to self-mastery, where you incrementally change. If your goal to master your weight, you don't go from a 4,000 calorie a day diet that's 90% sugar and to a 1,200 calorie. Nobody will do that. It just doesn't work. But if you incrementally start by changing the sodas to water, or reducing your sodas from 5 a day to 1 a day and drink water, whatever you can do incrementally, and then you start attacking each thing, then the reward system becomes different because you're looking for the change and you see the progress happen. Years ago, when I was getting out of my addiction, I had a ton of credit card debt, obviously, several $200,000 of credit card debt. And I had no means to pay it back. And so that was just mind numbing to me. And so I realized that if I just called all the credit card companies, I negotiated the debt down to, usually for pennies on the dollar, and then paid it off over time. And I found something amazing because I just dreaded paying that debt back. But I was sending them $25 a week. Some of them just really, I owe you $5,000. I'm paying $25 a week. Right. But as I started seeing that, and my negotiation where they would freeze interest, as I started seeing that principal go down, that thing go down, now I'm charged. It's like, okay, let me work a couple extra hours. Let me pay that. I took it was $243,000 total. I negotiated it down to about $25,000. And I paid it off over 2 years to a clean slate. And that was very rewarding. So I self-mastered my spending problem and all the other stuff by finding a way to challenge it. And I loved it. And as I say, not in a bragging sense, but my credit right now is for years has been absolutely perfect because I now value credit. I never late. I pay things instantly. it's just a wonderful way to live. And I changed that incrementally by doing it that way.
Yeah. I went through something similar. My debt level wasn't as high as that, but it was high enough for me. And I didn't actually negotiate anything down. I just paid it straight. The interesting thing that happened with me was I didn't really get any, to use the dopamine example, I didn't get any dopamine hits until it finally got paid off. And it was almost anticlimactic at that point.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean. It's like,
sure.
Oh, we got here, like, oh, finally. It was that kind of a thing. It wasn't like, yeah. I tried to turn it into because doing the show, I learned it was important to celebrate this stuff. So I did try to turn it into it. But the initial reaction was just,
yeah. Well, and that's part of what she talks about too, is trying to get your mindset to celebrate these events. And it's not always possible. And I can remember one of the disappointing things is, I had worked really hard to get to an income level, that was like really good, like $50,000 a year, really good income for the first time, making $50,000 a year. I'm like, wow, that's fantastic. And it was good. And it felt like I was, for the first time, participating. And this is years ago, so it's not as impressive sounding now, but then, my career started taking off, and I moved up to $75,000. And when I got to $100,000, that's a lot of money. I was like, that's a lot of money. Well, my paycheck wasn't that much bigger. It really wasn't, from 75 to 100. It was just, I just kept saying, is this right? I made $100,000 a year again. It's not only a little bit more than 75. And I was actually disappointed because it just wasn't what I thought it would be,
Yeah.
And again, I've adjusted that mindset, but you have this image of what that number would feel like. And then when you get there, it's like, well, it's not that much money after taxes.
I had kind of an inverse example with that, because when I got mine paid off, I actually paid it off in the midst of the early stages of the pandemic. So there was, nobody was working, very few people had any kind of income, all that kind of stuff. I was certainly in that boat because the income was coming off of the gardening business, which we weren't losing money on, but we certainly weren't making a bunch of money. So we had low income that year, and yet through because of a number of different reasons, I was able to pay off the last large chunk pretty quickly. And it surprised me. And so I actually I've told this story before, but I actually sat down, because I keep pretty good books on, how I spend my money. And I was able to account for all about 20 to 25% of it, in terms of, okay, how did I pay this off? Where did it come from? All that kind of stuff. And I couldn't figure out the 20 to 25%. Finally, after some skull sessions and talking with friends and co-hosts and so forth, I finally figured it out. It's because we were in lockdown. And in lockdown, you can't spend any money on anything. So all the stuff, all the ancillary stuff, that I would spend money on, to feel a little bit better here, a little bit better there, so forth, I wasn't spending it. And so that money was available, and I could use that to pay off the loan. I said, my God, that stuff really adds up. It's incredible. But I didn't realize that until I was in lockdown.
That's impressive. I'm really interested in how you didn't spend money during lockdown, because Amazon and DoorDash. Wow.
Well, I did this show called LOA Today. That's really where my my attention was going. So that one didn't cost me a whole lot.
Yeah, Amazon would just back up the truck daily. Let's just unload all this stuff. And my son discovered DoorDash, and he didn't understand. You don't order 4 meals a day from DoorDash.
With us, it was more that we weren't going out to restaurants, because you couldn't go to a restaurant. We weren't going out to do day trips. We weren't doing all that kind of stuff that you would normally be able to do because you were in lockdown. So we didn't really replace it with anything, which was why we had money left over to pay down the debt. But it was kind of astonishing how much there was out of it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And it's the ability to change things or do things, and with the money that I negotiated down that paid off, I paid it off much faster than I thought I would, because it gained momentum for me.
Yeah.
And I can get really stuck on something in any direction. So I've figured out a way I would check online, or I don't think it was online, but I just call the credit card to see my balance. And it's like, wow, when one credit card started at $5,000, or I think it was $2,500, and all of a sudden it was down to $1,800. That was a big hit for me. It's like, now I'm driven, and then a lot of people did it differently. A lot of people say you spread it across the board. I just started with one, and I got the biggest one paid off.
Right.
And then I started chunking away at that. And that's how I did it. That was
I did the same thing.
Yeah. I needed the reward of the bit. The advisors were telling me to do it differently, but I needed to do it the way I did it.
I agree with you. Yeah, that's exactly the way I needed to do it. And by the way, this also recalls something to me. I haven't done this in a while, but I got to do it again. We were talking earlier about how we can be chasing that dopamine hit. You can be looking for the more. I'm just remembering, if I want more, one of the best ways I can get that more feeling is because I maintain those accounts, even though they're all zero. I'll go look at my bookkeeping. And I'll look at, oh, the account balance of this is 0. What's the account balance of this one? Oh, this one's 0 too. Oh, this one's 0. That gives me a hit. Now that's kind of surprising to me. The paying it off part didn't actually give me a hit, but just looking at the 0 balance each time, I can do this over and over and over again, and every time it gives me a hit.
Well, yes, that's a technique that I recommend when you've been through something like that. You could transport yourself back to like, wow, I really did accomplish that.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned earlier, when I have some irrational financial insecurities, I'll just pull up one of my accounts and like my Fidelity account and go, oh, okay. I know it's there, but seeing it as okay, I'm not worried about that. But yet, you can use these visual tools that help a lot. One of the ways of doing this, Abraham Hicks, where you have an imaginary account where you write, and you spend money out of that imaginary account if it was real, writing checks and doing that. It's sort of reverse form of that, trying to get excited about spending money. You're going to spend $60,000 on a car today. You're going to write a check for it, and clearly it's just an act of you're just active doing it, but the feeling like that's what you're doing. You keep a ledger, and you allegedly start to feel like you have that money, and then it's easier to attract it, law of attraction style. So it's a fantastic technique, sort of reverse of what we're talking about doing. The same thing.
Well, and one thing I found about that particular game, I think they call it the checkbook game. They recommend doing it such that you put an imaginary $1,000 into your checkbook, and then you spend it, and then the next day you put it 2,000 in, and you spend that, and the next day you put in 4,000, and you just keep doubling it and so forth.
Yes.
And I can certainly see the value of doing it that way. What we ended up doing is it all in one go. So we would spend 1,000, and then 5 minutes later we spend 2,000, and 5 minutes later we spend 4,000, and so on and so forth. And the big takeaway for me playing that game was it was amazing to me how fast we could get to the point where we couldn't think of anything else to spend money on.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get it. Yes,
and you're racking your brain. You're thinking, well, I want the yacht, I want the house, I want this, I want that. Okay, but I already got that. Now what do I do?
Well, when I got to that point, I started looking at lakefront property in Lake Tahoe.
Yeah, right.
So that took care of things for a while, but to your point, yeah, it's just you run out of things, and it's just a sort of an amazing exercise of when you break down money and you look at it incrementally, like and I don't have it broken down right now, but X amount, $100 a day. That's $36,500 a year. It's just $100 a day. It's like that. And then you incrementally look at how quickly money can build, just breaking it down in the day. A lot of people that talk about wealth is like, okay, we need to make $643 a day to get to this amount. And how do you get to 643? And they reverse engineer it, and it's a technique taught by a lot of wealth experts of how to look at that and build wealth.
Yep. Well, it just goes to show you, it really comes down to what is the mindset that's going to jazz you, because that's really what they're trying to do. They're trying to find some way to get you activated to, wow, I want to keep going on this pattern. Basically, the more giving yourself the more in a way that it's actually feeding you. Oh, it feels good. I want more. Feels good. Oh, I want more. Feels good. That's the pattern you're trying to develop.
Yes, and that's exactly the point. That any of this stuff of changing, self-sabotage, self-mastery is change. Just that process we're talking about. Micro changing things as you go, getting your perspective adjusted to new. If you're awfulizing everything you see all the time, then you're never in a mindset of anything different. And so you're always in a self-sabotaging mindset because everything is the worst possible conclusion. There are people that like to use the worst possible conclusion technique as a tool. So what's the worst that can happen? And they say, okay, well, that's, so if worse can happen. So I very seldom hear anybody say, what's the best that can happen here?
Which works better for you, Sam? When you think about this, do you find aiming at, what's the worst thing that's going to happen versus what's the best thing that's going to happen? Which one works best for you?
Definitely the best. Like nowadays, I'll like kind of always just kind of putting trust that anything that happens is towards the best outcome possible. Ultimately, if it doesn't seem like in that individual's step on the way. But yeah, no, definitely, I definitely had that like worst outcome possible mindset for a while, and it definitely didn't serve me. And I still see that in people a lot. I'm like, no, but I have to kind of allow them to have their own journey.
So you have to flip it then. If you notice yourself going after the worst case scenario, you have to flip it to some way to getting to the best case scenario.
Exactly. Yeah. And I definitely found that works better for me personally.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it makes sense. I mean, because there's a lot more reward in it.
Well, yeah, and
nothing else.
Go ahead.
What were you saying, Sam?
Oh, it's just if nothing else, it feels better.
Yeah,
you're right. Well, I was for the majority of my life, I was younger life. I was certainly what's the worst possible to say? So let me prepare for that. So I was mentally preparing for the worst possible outcome, and I often got the worst possible outcome. As I prepared for it, I was pretty good at tracking that worst possible outcome, and it was, and even today, I never have worst possible outcome scenarios anymore, but I need to remind myself that everything that happened eventually became the best outcome. Everything, even what the worst outcomes years ago turned out to be the best outcomes at this point. So I know unequivocally that whatever happens, and I mean whatever happens, long term, it's the best outcome for me, and I believe that. It might be really bad that day, but it's never not been the best outcome, and that serves me really well nowadays. I don't see it any different. It's just when you and I first started talking, we went through me losing my job at the treatment center I worked at. It was not good. I thought it was not good, losing a high-paying job and unexpectedly, while I had plenty of money saved up, it was not. I wasn't prepared to lose that big of a job. If I didn't lose that job, I never would have had what I have now, ever. But I was law of attraction based back then, so I've had to fight that worst case scenario, despite my mom going, "Oh my gosh, this is the worst case scenario." Everybody telling me it's the worst case scenario, but in reality, it wasn't. It's like one of the greatest moves of my life is getting out of that job. And no disrespect to that job, it was a good conduit along the way. But I mean, have the life I have now, and we were talking about some of my coaching stuff right now. It's like I could never have imagined this level.
It's also interesting, and you actually did experience this. I've experienced this too. I'm sure many listeners have experienced this, where you had a major event. You lost this great position. It was part of this clinic that you'd helped put together, and then you repeated it years later. You did it again, and I've done the same thing. I've gone through something, and just recently I went through, for the second time, I went through apparently my entire life falling apart, which is exactly what happened 8 years before. And I could tell, even as I'm going through it, and you and I called you like the day after the whole thing started to happen. I said, this is just like 8 years ago. I remember this. I've been through this. I don't want to go through this again. We set ourselves up for these things, and then we go through them again. Is that because we haven't quite learned it yet?
I go again. I always reference Abraham Hicks, and Esther actually talks about this. She says there's not lessons to be learned. It's just it's more of an expectation that they keep happening again. It's not about lessons per se.
Yeah.
But it's I get to what you believe happens. What you believe subconsciously happens. So if relationships end poorly for you, and that's a subconscious belief, and literally if they end 8 years apart, they're going to end 8 years apart. It's just fascinating how that happens. One of the things I love when I start to see patterns. I don't love it, but it helps me show the people that I'm dealing with. A young man's in my office last week. He was caught cheating on his wife. They'd been married for 2 years. They have a 1-year-old son. He was horrified that he did it. He didn't know why he did it. He was just not in the right space. And so as we were just processing, I said, how was your childhood? And he goes, well, my mom and dad got divorced when I was the same age. And I did mine. So what happened? My dad cheated on her.
Yeah.
I said, how old were you? And he goes, same age.
Yeah.
And I said, he goes, I never thought about it that way. And I go, you literally are repeating the exact same thing you witnessed growing up, which you swore you would never do, but you gave attention to it. And that's where we are.
Yeah.
And you'll be shocked at how many people do the same things their family did and not realizing it until they oh my gosh, this happened.
Many people will be shocked. Believe it or not, I actually would not be shocked, just because I've heard so many stories that it doesn't shock me anymore. But yeah, it's still, even though you've heard, it's still kind of in its own way shocking. Like, there it is again. Yeah. Oh my God.
Well, when I'm doing that, I like to do a timeline with people, a family historical timeline. And, when you look at that and say, oh my God, you're literally following the exact same thing that took place. And
it's like a blueprint or something.
It is. It is. And I love that term, because it is a blueprint in your subconscious programming. It's what your programmed subconscious brain remembers, has no emotion, doesn't care. It just, that's what you programmed is what happens.
Yeah. Wow. It's mind-blowing stuff. Okay, so Sam, since you've been relatively quiet, we got a couple things from you, but I'm going to let you be the summary guy today. All right, so you've heard, you are now the jury. You've heard the evidence. What's your takeaway? What is it that you say, okay, this is what makes the biggest impact on me right now?
Honestly, I think I've just had to broaden my view in all the different ways people can self-sabotage themselves. And then also how it's not a one-step thing to get from that place of constantly sabotaging oneself to like being more in tune with yourself and working in tandem with yourself, but then it's well worth it once you do. And I think when you reach a place when you love yourself enough that you're not doing that so much, you become more averse to like more cognizant of that, because you don't want to sabotage yourself because you love yourself.
That's brilliant. I like that.
The only thought, the question in my mind is it because you love yourself enough, or is it because you felt enough pain?
Probably a bit of both in most cases, mine at least.
Well, it's funny you said that, Sam. The Brianna in the book, she mentions most people don't want to change until the pain of staying the same exceeds the pain of change. And that's an old recovery slogan. Nobody will ever stop an addiction until it just like me. I wasn't going to stop my gambling addiction because I never felt a consequence until I went to jail. Now, I want to be on record saying I didn't like jail.
I imagine.
Okay. So not good. The food was terrible. It was just boring. And, so my brain's like, okay, enough with the gambling, because I'm not doing jail again. Never doing jail again. And that was enough to change. It overrode that gambling pattern, because it's just, regardless of what program I went into or what, I'm not going to get, I'm done with jail. That was the program I needed.
It's funny. It's amazing how this stuff works. And it's amazing how when we can kind of look back and just see the pattern, it becomes very obvious. But it's always very challenging when we're in the midst of it. I think it's one of the reasons we like to talk about this, because it helps us to understand just ordinary stuff going on in our lives. How do we get there? How are we playing this thing over and over again? How are we doing all this stuff? So, maybe there is something to just having an intellectual knowledge of something as a step toward change.
Yeah, and that it begins. That's how it begins, and then an awareness and the ability to make those micro changes, those atomic habits we talked about on the other show. Those little changes then can lead to the floodgates open, but there's few people that make drastic changes all at once, unless there's drastic situations.
Yeah. Good conversation, guys. Sam, as usual, you made your comments were pithy, right to the point when we needed them. So thank you for that. And Joel, once again, you picked another terrific book that just is like right in our wheelhouse. You're good at that. Of course, when you read as many books as you do every year, it's not terribly surprising that you would have this at your fingertips, but nevertheless, you did it once again. So thank you very much.
And ironically, real quick, Walt, I told you that I was sort of led to read the book, The Council. We talked about that.
Right.
And well, I'm reading it, but it's not jumping out of the page. So I'm like, why was I told to read? I discovered this book as a recommendation off of that book. Is how. So I don't think The Council was such my recommendation, but maybe this was the one that I was supposed to see.
Okay.
So,
all right.
Yeah.
Well, that's the way life works, right? It points us to things.
Yes. And next week, one of my colleagues, former colleagues from my company I used to work for, will be joining us for a guest appearance and talk about some books he wrote. I really like that. He's one of my instrumental people early in the law of attraction. He's a psychologist that's brilliant, but he also is a big believer in the law of attraction. So I look forward to that next week.
And his name is?
Ken Martz, Dr. Ken Martz, Martz.
All right. So we're all looking forward to that. That's going to be a really good conversation. Anybody who likes to listen to the live stream, be sure to tune in Tuesday, 7 Eastern time. 7 p.m. Eastern time if you want to listen to it while we're live streaming it. Otherwise, just catch it on the normal podcast episode stream that comes through your phone or whatever you listen through. Sam, thank you again. Joel, thank you as well. Thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.